Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this virtual event. I am Abby, the Executive Director of the Vermont Ski and Snowboard Museum, and I am thrilled you all joined us here tonight. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank our Red Bench Speaker Series sponsors, Scholler Textile, RK Miles, Sisler Builders, and Vermont Ski and Ride. Their support, along with yours, allows us to host these events and continue our mission-driven work. As funding continues to be one of our biggest challenges, I encourage everyone in the audience and those watching this later to make a donation tonight. Every contribution, big or small, makes a difference. As an incentive, each donation will be entered into a raffle for a pair of Darn Tough ski socks. Every $10 earns you an entry. If you are a Red Bench season pass holder or you've already donated, you're automatically entered. And I will draw two winners on Monday. So get those donations in before that. Tonight, we are joined by two ski and snowboard storytelling legends, Tom Kelly and Peter Graves. Tom is a member of the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame and has spent over 30 years as the voice and advocate for U.S. Ski and Snowboard, serving as their VP of Communications. In 2018, Tom founded Tom Kelly Communications, a public relations company focusing on Olympic sports based in Park City, where he is joining us from tonight. Peter is a member of both the Vermont and U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, and absolutely no stranger to the Red Bench. Peter is well known as the voice of American skiing, having announced numerous Olympic Games, World Cup events, and national championships. Together, they are the perfect duo to discuss the lasting impact of past Winter Olympic Games because of their unparalleled experience in winter sports media and storytelling. With the 2034 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games set to return to Utah, they will explore what this means for Park City, a community deeply intertwined with Olympic history and the future of winter sports. So sit back, enjoy, and feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. We will get to those maybe throughout the evening if that makes sense, but certainly at the end. And Peter, I now hand this over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Abby, and welcome everybody. We've got a great show for you, a lot to cover. Really interesting with perhaps the ultimate insider in ski racing and snowboard and all of the skiing disciplines. So we're very happy to welcome from his home in Park City, Utah, to the Red Bench Series, Tom Kelly. Tom, good evening to you.
Well, it's great to be here. And Peter, I want to start out in just a couple of thoughts. First of all, it is so cool to look at the list of attendees and see so many old friends. So thank you guys for coming on tonight to listen to Peter and I talk and hopefully answer some of your questions. But also, I want to just thank Abby for this opportunity and for all of you who are out there listening tonight. Think about making a contribution to support the museum. That's how history is preserved, and Vermont has a fantastic museum. So with that, Peter, I'll let you take it away.
All right, Tom, thank you. By way of introduction and getting to know you and how you arrived, you're 72 years old now. Um, you had quite a background that we'll cover quickly so people know what you have done. But as I understand, uh, your gateway to what has been an incredible career uh, came by way of watching the 1960 Olympics, which were the first games live televised in the United States. Walter Cronkite was the host of those games, interestingly enough. But Tom, it was watching the 60 games that got you hooked on the Olympics.
Yeah, and it wasn't intentional either, but I was 7 years old at the time growing up in Madison, Wisconsin. I love telling this story. Mom had to go to the grocery store. She didn't have a babysitter, so she put me on the couch. She said, "Don't move. Stay there until I come home." And she put the TV on, and it just happened to be the Olympics from Squaw Valley. But I remember as a 7 year old, Penny Patu coming down the hill in the downhill event. She won the silver medal. And that was the moment where the Olympics crystallized for me. Now, I didn't do anything about it for some years, but that memory was always in there. And I tell people, and all of you on the call, think about your very first Olympic memory. Everybody has one, and that was mine, and that ultimately led to my career.
Yep. And then you went on to the Capital Times in Madison as a sports photographer and writer, and you're a superb photographer in addition to what you write.
Yeah, I was pursuing a career as a journalist, but in the back of my mind, I was really interested in this skiing thing and this Olympic thing. So I would find opportunities to, I mean, I was a newspaper photographer, but I would find opportunities to go to ski areas, shoot photographs there, go to ski races. And I remember that Ski Racing magazine paid me, I think something like 25 or $30 to drive up to the Upper Peninsula to cover the Junior Nordic Nationals in Ishpeming in probably 1973 or 74. And that was a huge deal for me to go up there and photograph that. And it was just kind of bringing me closer to skiing. And eventually I lost that newspaper job in a strike. But my good friend Tony Wise at the Telemark ski area, I'd been doing work for him, and he convinced me to come up there and take the vacant job as the PR director in 1977. And that put me right in the middle of what was a really amazing time at Telemark as a training center for the U.S. cross country ski team.
And it's where you and I crossed paths the first time.
Yeah, I mean, you had the job before I did, and I don't remember exactly how we crossed paths, but we did, and the rest is history. We've been friends and colleagues now for pretty much 50 years.
And then, of course, you got hired by USSA and later the U.S. ski team.
Yeah, and I really I tell people, if you want to follow your pathway, just look for those little steps and they'll present themselves. And the key people for me in making that step from working at the ski area at Telemark to the U.S. Ski Association were people like Howard Peterson and Lee Todd, who were my bosses there and brought me on to the team in Colorado Springs and spent 2 years there. And then ultimately, Howard moved the organization over here to Park City, Utah in 1988. And at that point, I asked if I could expand my wings a little bit and also take over PR for all of the disciplines. I had been assistant national Nordic director under Lee Todd for 2 years, and that was a great experience working in Nordic sport.
And then how long were you with the U.S. ski team?
So I think it was about 34 years. I started in, we could probably do the math here. I started with the team in '88, and then I retired in 2018. So it was a long run. Probably the most exciting job that one could ever have. I worked with the likes of amazing athletes from Peekaboo Street to Bodie Miller to Michaela Schifrin to Shaun White, Kelly Clark, and so many more. It was just a great experience.
And when did you retire?
I retired in 2018, but I've
Yeah.
been busier. I've been busier since 2018 than I was.
Yeah. And Tom, now you consult with a number of the smaller Olympic sports, and you're also on the committee for Salt Lake City, Utah, in 2034. What's your role so far in that?
So relative to this, to the other sports that I've worked with, what I wanted to do when I left US Ski and Snowboard in 2018 was to really use my knowledge, my network, and stay, actively engaged in Olympic sports. So I worked for climbing, speed skating, biathlon, a whole variety of smaller national governing bodies. And then we had the potential of the Olympics coming. One of my clients was the Utah Sports Commission, which is an organization that brings events to Utah. Since the games in '02, it's brought over 1,100 events and generated over $4 billion in economic impact. So working for Sports Commission, I got involved in the early formation of the bid around 2018 or 19, was involved in putting together some of the exploratory reports. And then I went on more or less full time with the bid in I think it was probably in 2020 or so. And I was very much involved with the bid, the award of which we got in Paris in last July. That was an exhilarating experience. And, it was interesting in working on a bid because when you work on the games, you're working on an entire event. It takes place over a period of time. But when you're working on a bid, it's very you either get it or you don't get it. And, so everything we did for 3 or 4 years, it worked up to that singular moment in Paris when we were awarded the games. And it was a really a great feeling of accomplishment to get those games and to bring them back. We had a good plan. We made a good pitch, and we're going to talk more about legacy, but a lot of what we pitched was the legacy, where it's not just about the 17 days of the games plus the Paralympics. It's about what you bring back to your communities and how you make it really a perpetual impact. And that's what Salt Lake City has done so successfully. And I would also say Lake Placid has done that very well also.
Yeah, and that segues right into talking about Lake Placid, our first Olympic Games. Thrilling, of course, in so many ways. Uh, what are some of your recollections of Lake Placid?
Well, it was an interesting games, and I was only there for the first half of the games because we had our American Birkebeiner cross country race on what was the final weekend of the games. So I went out there and I had two roles. I was the assistant press chief for cross country skiing. I worked in the press center in right in the heart of Lake Placid, and I also, with you, Peter, we were stadium announcers. So I was an assistant stadium announcer with you, and I have a couple of really poignant memories of the games. Number one, I remember the opening ceremonies, and I didn't go to a lot of opening ceremonies. I've been to 11 games, and I didn't always go to the opening, but I did go to Lake Placid, and I just remember the ceremony itself, not nearly to the scale that it is today, but I remember the Olympic rings and the flags and the colors of that opening ceremony. I remember going out to the rink and watching Eric Hayden win the first of his 5 gold medals. Eric had grown up in my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. I didn't know him personally, but I had covered him before in town. So being there at the old outdoor rink in Lake Placid to watch him get that first gold medal and not really understanding at that point the history that was going to be made by Eric Hayden over the next week or so. But my most poignant memory, which I know it is for you as well, is announcing the 15K race, cross country race, the men's event, and the battle between Juha Mieto of Finland and Thomas Vosberg of Sweden. And you and I had become friends with them. They trained at Telemark. They'd been there for our World Cup. So we knew them, and they battled it down to the wire. Mieto watched as Vosberg came in and beat him by the narrowest of margins. And I just remember the big, tall, lanky Finn out in the woods behind our little announce shack, just bent over, his hands on his knees, just sobbing because he had lost that gold medal.
Yeah, it was an incredible moment, the closest race in history, and there'll never be one that close again because the FIS has changed their timing. Um, so we'll get back to the legacy of Lake Placid in a minute. Salt Lake City and the 2034 games, how tough was it to win the bid, and who were you competing against?
It was, I think I'm going to go back to why we won the bid first, because I think that's the really essential piece. What we put together here was a bid that was sustainable. And when you think about sustainability, there's a lot of different ways you can go, but sustainability to us was the reuse of venues. So the bid that we put forward for 2030 or 2034 was a bid that utilized all of the venues from 2002. One exception to that, we did not put forward the curling venue in Ogden. It is a fantastic venue, but it's just too small. So instead of building a new venue or spending what would probably be hundreds of millions of dollars to enlarge the facility in Ogden, we chose to bid with an ice sheet that we will put down in the Salt Lake Convention Center, the Salt Palace Convention Center in downtown Salt Lake City. But that's the only change that we made. All the other venues are going to be used as they were in '02. We anticipate probably having 40% more events than we did in '02, and we're going to be able to accommodate that on all of the existing venues. So that was the message we took forward, number one. Second message was one of legacy, one of giving back to communities. So we had 3 vision points. One was to elevate communities, elevate sport, elevate the games experience. And those became our mantra. And the whole aspect of giving back to communities through sport, not just to develop top athletes, but to convey those life skills that are so important for kids. That was really the premise of our bid. So there was no one that could compete with us on that basis. We really had something that no one else really could match. There were a lot of other cities along the way that came forward. Calgary was in there for a while. Vancouver was in there. Sapporo was in there. There were other bids from overseas. Sweden was in there for a while. The French Alps were in there, Switzerland. So there were a lot of other areas, but nobody really had the componentry that we had. We did, however, have a challenge, and that was Los Angeles in 28. So for us to go for the 2030 games, that would have only been about a year and a half after Los Angeles. And that really was too close a time frame. It wouldn't have been really economically feasible with sponsors to do it that close. So what we really needed to do was to find another site that could take 2030 and that we could then slot into 2034. And that's exactly what happened. The French Alps came on. They will be a great site in 2030. They just named their organizing committee this week. The great mogul skier from France, Edgar Gros-Perron, is going to be the president of that games. And now it will be French Alps in 2030. It'll be Salt Lake City, Utah in 2034. And 2038 right now, the Swiss, which would be a full national bid, are the only one that the IOC is talking to for 2038.
And I sheepishly remind you, we'll be about 83 at the time of those games. So hopefully we'll be there with luck. All the venues in Salt Lake are within an hour away. Let's talk about legacy, Tom. And let's begin with a program that has had with the Olympic Regional Development Authority, the legacy of Lake Placid coming out of 1980. They've kept the facilities up. Many of them are brand new, and they continue to hold big events, the World Cup in ski jumping a few weeks ago, and many, many others. Legacy seems to be so important now and so wise.
It is. And one thing that we hope we can do in Salt Lake City, Utah, is to show the world how legacy can work and how you can put on a games. You can run them with a surplus. You can put that money back into communities. And that's what we've done. Lake Placid has done an amazing job. There has been phenomenal support from the New York State Legislature to continue to funding those venues. And what's important to look at with these venues, and this is something we face right now, some people think that these venues are being funded purely for the Olympics, and it's really not the case at all. Our venues are being funded for day-to-day activities. It's for kids growing up in our communities. It's for athletes from around the world who decide to make Utah their home because of these facilities. And Lake Placid, I don't think, went into the 1980 games with a legacy plan, but they came out of it with one. And thanks to the work of ORDA and the support of the New York State Legislature, they've been able to do that. But the concept of legacy, as it related to 2002, really came out of, interestingly enough, the Calgary Games in 1988. And I'm sure that some of you on the call will remember George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, who had been the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee at the time. He was pretty upset about the lack of performance by Team USA at Calgary in 1988. So he ended up doing a big study, and out of that study, one of the findings was that we need more places for athletes to develop in the United States. You know, we have Lake Placid, but we need more. And one person who really caught on to that concept was Howard Peterson, who was at the time the Secretary General of the U.S. Ski Association. And Howard caught on to that in 1988 and 89. And he put forward within the U.S. Olympic Committee a really, really well thought out agenda that the U.S. should be selecting a future Olympic city based on its ability to contribute to sport on a day-to-day basis. And he wasn't doing it to support Salt Lake City. He was just putting the concept out there. Salt Lake City picked up on it. and agreed to build all of these venues before the games were even awarded to Salt Lake City for the purpose of giving back to the communities, and it's been a huge success. But I do feel proud that it was our organization, U.S. Ski Association, that really launched that legacy concept in 1989 that ultimately brought the games to Salt Lake City and has now completely transformed sport in our state.
All right, I'm going to go through a few Olympic Games. You already spoke of Lake Placid. You've been to 11 Olympics, Tom, and maybe short bites on all of these. Uh, Lillehammer in 1994 still has to go down as one of the best games in history. Your thoughts?
A cold games. When I think of Lillehammer, I think of cold, but I also think of this was the cradle of the sport. So when I'm asked that question of your 11 games you've been to, which was your favorite? Hands down, it's Lillehammer, just because of the culture and watching Norwegians camp out overnight to get a good spot on the cross country trail and walk miles from the train station to get up to the ski jumps and the race hill up at Kvitfjell and Hafjell. It was just an amazing games for that reason, but it was really cold.
Mm, mm. Uh, Salt Lake, which has become your adopted hometown, or Park City, a lot of hometown pride. Um, there was great emotion. It was the first games after 9/11, Tom.
Yeah, and it was pretty poignant games, and you were there, Peter. You were the announcer in the stadium when the
Yep.
9/11 flag came in, and all of us still get choked up about that. We tell that story a lot. We just named a new CEO last week, Brad Wilson's former Speaker of the House here in Utah. And it's a story that he tells. He wasn't involved in the Olympics in '02, but he went to that ceremony and he still gets choked up telling that story about the 9/11 flag coming in. It was a great Olympics. It was well organized. There were great results for the USA, some amazing memories. It was also, I mean, just little points. It was the first time the Paralympics had been organized by the same organizing committee, something that they take really great pride in. Yesterday, just a mark of diversity. Yesterday was the anniversary of Vanetta Flowers and Jill Bakken winning in the bobsled, and it was the first time that a black woman had won a medal at the Olympic Games. And there were little things like that, and great memories of athletic accomplishments, and certainly one of the best games I've ever been to.
Let's talk about Vancouver 2010.
What's poignant for me about Vancouver is that some years earlier, 14 years earlier to be exact, we had a new CEO come in, Bill Marolt, who many of you know. And Bill sat us all down and he had us come up with a strategic plan, which we hadn't really been doing. And we came up with this vision of being the best in the world in Olympic skiing and snowboarding. Nobody really knew what that meant, but we were going to be the best in the world in Olympic skiing and snowboarding. And 14 years later, we're at Vancouver. We're winning a lot of medals on the first weekend. Hannah Carney and Shannon Barkey won gold and bronze to open it up. Seth Westcott won a gold, and all of a sudden, things are dropping in place. We started to do the math, and we said, this is what it's all been about. And we did. We won 21 medals in skiing and snowboarding. It was more than any other nation, and felt really proud that we capped a 14-year run with best in the world in Vancouver in 2010.
Tom, do you think a lot of American athletes perform better at home on a U.S. destination?
You know, that's an age-old question, and it's a tough one because you do have significant distractions when you're competing at home. Canada was kind of nice because you had the benefits of being kind of close to home, but it wasn't your games. It was Canadian games. So I think that that really did help a lot. But it is a question you hear a lot, and we think about this as we look ahead to 2034. And one of the things that we are going to build into the 2034 games, we're going to create for the first time ever an athlete family village. So we'll have the athlete village at the University of Utah, but we will have a family village next door where parents, siblings, brothers, sisters, kids, they can hang out and they can be close to their family members who are Olympians or Paralympians. And this was a concept that Catherine Rainey Norman, our board chair and a four-time Olympic speed skater, together with Lindsey Vonn, came up with, and it's been really well received by the IOC.
All right, Tom. And then games that not everybody talks about a lot, but Sochi 2014, we were both there. The Russians are winter sport experts for sure, and they really did put on a good games.
You know, it's funny because very few people put Sochi on there. Yeah, that was a great games list. It's on mine though. And it was funny coming in, and we knew coming in we were going to have challenges. The hotels weren't finished. There were a lot of problems. And I just came into it, fortunately, with a fair amount of experience at that point, but I was able to take all of those challenges and work with them to create an advantage. And at the end of the day, that was, I thought, a really good games. We had good success there as Team USA. I had a really good experience. I enjoyed working with the Russian people. And I left the games on that final Sunday after closing ceremony with a really good feeling about things. Unfortunately, 3 days later, Putin invaded Crimea, and that kind of all went away. And I haven't had a good feeling about it since. But those 17 days of the games in Sochi were very positive for me.
Okay. Tom, I asked you in advance some of your favorite big memories, and maybe you can speak about these in reasonably rapid fire. But one of them was Donna Weinbrecht in Albertville.
Yeah, I'll just give you, because I have so many, and I'll just pick out a few to give you. And Donna Weinbrich certainly is a big way to kick it off. Donna, who spent a lot of her training time up at Killington in Vermont. She had a family had a home up there, but her winning the gold medal on in teen in '92, and I look back on that video. She did I think her big trick was a Daffy Twister spread. You know, it's nothing like what you see today, but that was the start of freestyle moguls, and it was a great memory for me from those games. And then 2 years later, we opened the games on the opening Saturday with Tommy Moe winning the gold medal in the downhill. And very few memories will ever eclipse that day. The We were not a strong team coming into those games. Many people had given up on us. Sports Illustrated called us the lead-footed snowplow brigade, but we used that as a motivator. And I think the team had it posted up at their wax cabins. But Tommy came out and won that downhill, and Diane Roth eventually winning the Super G, starting in the number one position. A short time later, Peekaboo Street winning a silver medal in the women's downhill. Tommy Moe coming back and winning silver on his birthday in the Super G event. So lots of memories there. And the kind of the for me the really breakout performance Olympics was Nagano in 1998. It was also the debut of snowboarding, which we had been very involved with. But you had Johnny Mosley winning gold in moguls. You had Nikki Stone and Eric Burgess winning gold on the same day in aerials. And that was very much a tribute to the training center in Park City. But the one that really stood out for me, I'd been close to Peekaboo Street. I'd met her when she was just a teenage girl and got hurt at Steamboat. I was there for her world championship medal in '93. But when she won that gold medal, coming back from knee reconstruction, she wasn't really ready to be back at that level of competition. But it was a strategic play, and she and her coach, Hervig Dempster, they made it a race day call to switch skis and to use downhill skis in the Super G. And I went back a few years ago and revisited that course and looked at it, and the course was just suited to her. She won that gold medal by 100th of a second, and you know that to me is one of my favorite memories.
Yeah, Nikki Stone, Eric Burgess, 1998, Nagano sweeping Ariel's gold.
Yeah, that was it was a real tribute to the Utah Olympic Park where they had trained, and it was just a fun day to be there. I was there for both of those medals, and Nikki won hers, and then Eric won his, and they were just they were best in the world, and it was just a great experience in an Olympics that I don't have a ton of memories on. It was obviously a very distant place, and it was things were a little bit scattered, but those athletic memories, they'll stick around forever.
All right. Uh, Certainly, we saw the emergence of Darren Rolfs, won the World Championships in 2001 at St. Anton. He won at Hahnenkamm. We saw him really grow and progress.
Yeah, it was fun to watch Darren's career. Unfortunately, he never had Olympic success, but he won everything else. He won downhill World Cup races, Super Gs. He won the Hahnenkamm in '03. But the one that I continue to go back to is his accomplishment in February or at the World Championships in St. Anton in 2001. And the Austrians were completely stacked in the speed events. They were set and poised to win all of the medals, especially in Super G. And Darren comes down and he had the fastest time and nobody could beat him. I think the Austrians took two, three, and four, but Darren took that gold medal. And it was all we won there, but it was something that really gave a shot of energy to our program to see that we could do that. And then things started to fall in place. I tell you, one other memory I have from St. Anton is sitting in a room with Bodie Miller, who was a young unknown skier from Franconia, New Hampshire at the time. He had just injured his knee, and he was talking about all these different crazy things that he was going to be able to do and getting these kind of different kind of surgeries. And we thought the guy was absolutely nuts. But he went and he did that. And he came back the next year. He won medals at the Olympics in Salt Lake City. But the one that he accomplished that next year was he won the Schladming night race. The night slalom at Schladming is an amazing event. I think it's bigger than Kitzbühel. Under the lights, 50, 60,000 fans along the side of the hill. And Bodie Miller won that thing. And all of a sudden, the U.S. ski team, we were a real deal in Europe.
Very interesting. 2002, another big snowboarding breakthrough with Kelly Clark and Ross Powers.
Yeah, I was, snowboarding started in '98. We had some success there, but the real key came in 2002. Kelly Clark, a Vermont native, winning that event for the women. Kelly and I went on to become really good friends, and I really admire all she accomplished and the grace with which she carried herself through her career. And Ross Powers leading a sweep, gold, silver, bronze. And I remember that day. That was actually the day of the women's downhill up in Snow Basin. Peekaboo Street had drawn a really good start number for herself. She was in the mid-teens, I think. And unfortunately, there was a band of fog hanging over the mid part of that course, and they eventually canceled it for the day, and they came back to run it a few days later. So I busted tail back to Park City. I pulled into the parking lot. I ran into the snowboard venue, and I didn't know what was going on. There were no I don't even know if we had mobile phones then. I'm sure we at least had those, but we had no idea. I had no idea what was going on. I just ran into the venue and I'm looking at the scoreboard and something isn't right to me. I said, well, why is there just US names up there? And then pretty soon I realized that we were taking all three medals. Ross Powers, Danny Cass, JJ Thomas. That was an amazing day. And I just like, oh, this is happening.
Let's go back to another one of your memories, of course. Billy DeMong and the U.S. Nordic Combined team in Vancouver 2010, striking gold
I'm
for
going
the
to go
first time in Nordic Combined.
I'm going back to that plan of best in the world when Bill Marold came on in 1996 and start to lay out this plan. Tom Stites, who was the Nordic combined coach at the time, he really saw an opportunity and he went into Bill Marold's office, was one of the first to do this, put down a plan in front of Bill, and Bill loved plans. But Tom Stites put that plan in front of him and said, this is what we've got. This is what we need. This is what we could accomplish. Here's how much money we need. But the plan was so well defined that Bill Marold bought into it and started to really fund that program. And it took 14 years. But out of that 14 years, US became a real powerhouse in Nordic combined. You could look at the World Championships, which were just a year earlier in 2009, U.S. dominance with Todd Lodwick winning multiple gold medals at the World Championships in the Czech Republic. So when we get to Vancouver, we're really primed. And we won medals in every event there in Nordic combined, 4 in total, including silver in the relay. But the day that Billy DeMong won the gold medal in Nordic combined, man, that was really special. That was like Keegan and Jesse winning gold in Pyeongchang.
Yeah, we'll talk about them in just a second. Michaela Schifrin has been a dominant athlete for the last decade. I was able to be in Sochi doing alpine, calling her gold medal in slalom, but she was also the 2013 world champion in Schladming, Austria.
She's won 99 World Cups, countless Olympic medals, 15 World Championship. But I go back to the very first international medal that she won as a top World Cup athlete when she won the World Championship slalom in Schladming in 2013. She was, I think, 16 years old at the time, 16 or 17 years old. And I remember her coming down with these near perfect runs and then kneeling in the finish line, just her head down, just absorbing the moment. It was one of the most poignant moments that I witnessed. She, of course, went on to great fame, and there's still a lot more ahead for Michaela, but that's the moment that I most remember for Michaela Schifrin.
And of course, in 1976, Bill Koch made a major breakthrough for the United States, winning a silver medal in Innsbruck. We finally got the gold medal on a cold winter night with Keegan Randall and Jesse Diggins, 2018 Pyeongchang. Tom, that was a night that also evoked a lot of emotion.
We had had that date circled on our calendars for a long time. It was the team sprint, two athletes, an event that we'd excelled in. And I'll go back a few years earlier to 2013, the Nordic World Championships in Val di Fiemme. I had been over at the ski jumps, I think on the day of Sarah Hendrickson's gold medal in ski jumping, and I had hustled back to the team sprint in cross country at another venue. And I remember coming into the venue, and at that point, it was Keegan skiing alone, coming to the finish. And again, much like I was confused with the snowboarders, I'm looking at the scoreboard. It's the last lap. Keegan Randall is in the lead, and I'm thinking, are we really winning this event? And we did. And it was Keegan, the veteran, pairing up with the newcomer, Jesse Diggins. Well, things 5 years later were flipped. This time it was Keegan skiing alongside the savvy veteran, Jesse Diggins. But we'd circled that day in our calendars. We knew it was going to be a good event for us. And at least my mentality for that day was I was looking at this as an opportunity for us to get a medal, an Olympic medal in cross country skiing. And that's kind of the way I approached it when I went to the stadium that night. And we're watching this, we're literally right on the finish. This was, by the way, if you've ever been to big events, sometimes you just find yourself into secured areas that you probably shouldn't be in, but you are, and you just roll with it. Pete, it's a little bit like when we were in the locker room when Dick Button came running through and Randy and Ty had just
Right.
bowed out of the competition in 1980. So we're literally at the finish area. I'm standing like at the stanchion on the fence. There's nobody else around us. We had the best seats in the house. And we're watching this race. And in the middle of as we headed into the last exchange, I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that these women are going for a medal. I think they're going for the win. That just hadn't been my mentality. I was thinking of getting a medal. But Jessie Diggins on that last lap, she was out for the win. She wasn't worrying about silver or bronze. She was looking at that gold medal and how she skied that last lap. It was just a remarkable experience. And to be there to see this culmination of something that I'd been involved with for 30 years at that point in cross country skiing, to see that come together. Now we are looked upon in America as one of the better countries in the world. We're becoming deeper in that sport. But I look back to that moment in Pyeongchang in 2018 as a real milestone for Team USA.
And Diggins continues to enjoy great success this season on the World Cup. We've talked about some remarkable athletes. We've talked a little about Peekaboo, Bodie. Lindsey Vonn is one of your remarkable athletes. Of course, she made big news last November by announcing she would return. What say you about Lindsey Vonn?
Well, it's interesting when I think back to Lindsay. I don't have like with Peekaboo, I have that pivotal moment. With Lindsay, I don't have that single pivotal moment. Her gold medal that she won in the downhill in Whistler at the Vancouver Games, that certainly is right up there, and I remember that well. But with Lindsay, it's the whole package. It's everything that she's done. And just as a little bit of a backstory, when I worked at Telemark, her father, Alan Kildow, was
Mhm.
our attorney. So I knew her father even before she was born. And
And
I
she
knew
grew up skiing at Buck Hill.
she grew up at Buck Hill. And I knew the kind of person that her father was, hard driving. But I was thinking, strategizing. He was a ski racer himself. So I understood where she was coming from and what she put into her career. But that gold medal in Vancouver, in my mind, was a real turning point for her. She she knew what she wanted to do. She wanted to be a great ski racer, but she also wanted kind of that global fame that comes with being a top athlete. And that doesn't just come naturally. You have to work for that. And I've watched her over the years market herself, put herself forward, get herself out there in the world. And I've really admired what she's done. A lot of people had thoughts on why is she coming back? Why is she doing this comeback? And if you've worked with elite athletes, you can't second guess that. They know more than you do. And she knew what she wanted to do. And it wasn't about more fame. It wasn't about more fortune. It wasn't about what the fans thought. It was about what she wanted to do. And she still had unfinished business. She felt her knee was in good shape. Yeah, it'd been 5 years since she'd been out there, but she wanted to get back out there and ski. And I had spent some time with her when we were at Paris for the bid award this past summer and stayed close in contact with her team over the course of the fall. And she really had a methodical approach to this. Before anybody out in the world knew she was doing this, she had a methodical approach to how she was going to do this. And I think she can. I saw her at Beaver Creek, and I think that she considers this to have been a success so far. Uh, she hasn't won anything big yet, but she's shown that she is indeed competitive. And unfortunately, she wasn't feeling well at the World Championships. But I look forward to seeing what she can do to see if she can make that team and get to Milan Cortina to get onto the course where she's won 12 times more than anybody else has ever won on that speed course in Cortina. So I'm a real fan, and I really feel happy for her that she's been able to do this.
And Tom, there were significant naysayers, particularly on social media, about Lindsay's return.
Yeah, and I feel bad about that. And she can look past that. But at the end of the day, for the people that are trying to warn her about what she could do or the accidents she could have, this is her body. She knows how to manage it, and she knows the risks that she's taking too. And I think we should celebrate what she's doing. I think she very quickly, when she got out there and when she foreran at Beaver Creek, when she got in those fist races at Copper, and then when she got back onto the course in St. Moritz and showed that, yeah, she's got what it takes. And I think we should celebrate her and wish her well. And hopefully she can get to Milan Cortina next year.
All right, as we continue on, we would entertain any questions that you have. You can type it in on your computer. Two other names that we want to mention. Shaun White, he just owned the sport. He became the face of the sport.
Shaun was one really interesting character, and I have always enjoyed the time that I have spent with him. So I want to tell his story though in Sochi, and it didn't go well for him in Sochi. I mean, he was coming in with a couple of gold medals in halfpipe, and he decided coming into Sochi, it was the debut of slopestyle in the Olympics, and he thought he's going to go in and he's going to win medals in slopestyle and win medals in halfpipe, and it didn't work. And I just felt bad for Shaun. I, I just didn't feel that he really had the best direction coming in trying to do that. I always admire athletes that are trying to do something that's, really a lofty goal, but it proved to be really challenging for him. He eventually pulled out of the slope style, focused on half pipe, ended up suffering a huge crash, finished fourth. So he was close to the medals again, but probably one of the most exciting moments for me was being with him in 2018 when he won that gold medal again in Pyeongchang. And he was a different person, completely different person than he had been 4 years ago. And he came in with a prudent plan, got the job done, and his tears in the finish area really told the story of what that meant for Shaun White. And he's still out there, folks. I don't know if we'll see him back, but he is still out there. And too, I want to just a shout out to Chloe Kim, who is having a sensational season this year. She won X Games. She won the Locks Open. She is throwing tricks that actually the only person throwing the kind of tricks she is right now is her teammate Maddie Mastro. So I think we're in for a really good show on the women's half pipe side when things get to Milan Cortina next year. Those snowboard events will be up in Livigno.
Okay. And Tom, we'd be remiss of not talking about our Vermonter, Hannah Carney, because she was so dominant in moguls.
We, we apologize. We have stolen Hannah from the state of Vermont. She is now living in Park City, and she and Mike are raising their family here. She was another really remarkable athlete. When she tied Donna Weinbrich's record of 46 World Cup wins, most ever on the women's side for mogul skiing, it was just a really proud moment to know that these two U.S. women had accomplished that feat. Hannah won that gold medal in Vancouver on opening weekend night under the lights, beating the Canadians who were heavily favored. And she did it on the kind of the perseverance that she had and the training that she'd put in. And I remember her trainer had given her a little slip of paper on which he had documented all of the how many miles you've run, how many weights you've pushed, and all of these things. And she kept it in her coat pocket that day just to remind her of the work that she had put in. And then 4 years later, she made one small mistake in her run in Sochi,
Oh, gee.
dropped her from gold to bronze. And it was one of the hardest moments that I've had to be a part of. She was so distraught about that. It was so upsetting to her. She was so focused on winning that day. The bronze wasn't really satisfaction for her, and it's just hard to comfort an athlete when they have that level of intensity. But she's giving back to the sport right now. She is doing commentary. She is working for U.S. Ski and Snowboard. She is entertaining donors, and she is now the biggest cheerleader for the U.S. freestyle ski team.
All right, Tom, we'll continue on. But right now, we've got a question from Brian Schwinn. Thank you for that, Brian. He says, Franz Klammer's gold medal run was my Olympic moment. I was at Lake Placid and watched the Mayer brothers at the 1980 Olympic slalom. Tom, do you have any reflection on Steve and Phil's impact on U.S. ski racing?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, and I'll talk about Phil and Steve, but I want to come back to Franz Klammer too. Phil and Steve had a remarkable impact, and if you go back to the '80s to look at what they were doing in the standard that they set, and they were joined by a lot of others. It was a real heyday for the U.S. Alpine ski team. You can look at Debbie Armstrong, Kristen Cooper, Bill Johnson, and the list goes on. So they really set a standard. I think the challenge was that the organization wasn't really poised to take that challenge and run with it. So there was a gap. And after those athletes retired, there were very few standard bearers. Tamara McKinney stayed on for a few years. She won a gold medal in the combined in '89 at Vail Beaver Creek. But there really wasn't a program to capture that until we got out into the '90s a ways. So there was definitely a gap on the Alpine side, but they certainly, even still today, they are great heroes in the sport. But I wanted to talk about Franz Klammer. His story just is so remarkable about what he accomplished on in '76. And there was a movie done that unfortunately has never seen distribution in the US. But if you Google around, maybe you can find it. But an Austrian and German production company did a film on him about 2 or 3 years ago. And I've seen the film. It was a remarkable piece. And what they did with that film is they really focused on only those days leading up to the '76 downhill and really capsulized his life in those few days in the moment of that gold medal. I just wish that film could have gotten American distribution because it was a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. We're taking your questions for Tom Kelly. Let's type it in your computer and he'll answer live. Tom, let's talk about the governance of the sport. In the United States, it's U.S. Ski and Snowboard, that is an NGB, a national governing body. And all the ski countries of the world have their national association. But at the top of it all, you have the FIS, now run by Johan Elias. Sarah Lewis was previous to there, and then the popular John Franco Casper. Overall, what are your impressions on the FIS and its governance right now?
Well, I worked in the era of Mark Hodler and for a very long time, John Franco Casper, who passed away a few years ago. And the International Ski Federation, during that time, I worked with them, which is all through the 90s, the 2000s, 2010, until my retirement in 2018, was pretty much run by John Franco Casper. And it was a pretty authoritarian rule. But things worked and they made an enormous amount of money for the sport. It was awkward at times, but I look back on it now and think, he really had a pretty good handle on what was being done. One of the biggest challenges in sport is how do you raise the money necessary to really conduct the sport, to pay the prize money, to organize the events. And a lot of that comes from broadcast television. And one of the challenges is that many, many, many years ago, the International Ski Federation more or less gave up its rights to the World Cup to the host nations. So the International Ski Federation doesn't have now, nor has it ever had in recent history, the rights to the World Cup for broadcast. It all belongs to the host nations and the national ski associations from those countries. So what Johan is trying to do in coming in is definitely the right idea. He's trying to wrestle those rights back in to centralize them. And if you look at some of the more successful sports financially, sports like the International Biathlon Union, they do it because they have their marketing rights and their broadcast rights centralized. And we don't have that in skiing. He's trying to do that. He's doing it kind of with the hammer approach. Some might say there's better ways to do it, but he is using the hammer approach. And he's slowly but surely getting nations to go along with him, Austria still being a holdout. So when people look at why don't we have one single source for television in the United States, that's a really big part of it because the rights are different. If the race is being held in Austria, it's a different rights holder than when the race is being held in Switzerland. And at the World Championships, it is a little bit different. The FIS does hold the rights to the World Championship, so it is responsible for that. This year, American viewers had multiple choices on how to watch the races. You could watch it free on NBC when they put events on in a delayed broadcast. That was free over the air. You could pay a small amount of money for Peacock, and you could get every race delivered live. Or you could pay a little bit larger amount of money for Ski and Snowboard Live, which is a streaming system that is run by a company called Infront. And you could watch all the races live with commentary and you could watch replays. So you had choices. I know that people would like to see everything just on one platform so we know all the time where it is. But I think the reality of the sports world, and you can look around at other sports and see this as well, is that that's probably not going to be the case. And I, for one, feel that the access to skiing coverage right now on streaming is phenomenal. You're going to have to take a minute to figure it out, though, folks, and you're going to probably have to pay a little bit of money. But if you want to watch it, it's all there for you.
All right, Tom, thanks for that. We have two questions here. Based on climate change, is the organizing committee, I presume this may be Salt Lake or it may be a general, considering the selection of future Olympic venues based on average snowfall and locations with existing infrastructure? China comes to mind. Tom?
China does come to mind, but I'm not sure a lot of people really want to go back there. But it does come to mind. For sure, the International Olympic Committee is looking at this, and you've probably heard talk about a rotating games where there's a cycle of cities that it goes to. That's a good idea, but I think Mother Nature is going to dictate that. That's going to happen organically, at least in the Winter Olympics. So the IOC has done a lot of studies and looking at sites that are climate reliable is the term that they use. Utah is one of those that right now is looked upon as climate reliable. Now, we could have this conversation in 5 or 10 years, and maybe we'll be talking differently. But right now, the climate in Utah is looked at as being reliable. The climate in Japan, particularly up in Hokkaido, is looked at as climate reliable. China is looked at as climate reliable. There are different places in the Alps that have that. That's obviously going to be an evolving standard. But right now, we're pretty comfortable here in Salt Lake City. We don't have a lot of concerns about 34, but it is something that all of us do pay attention to. One area that I tend to look at on this is look at investment in the ski industry. There is still an enormous amount of investment going into the ski industry around the world, and in particular in the United States. And I look just here close to home, Deer Valley is just opening up an entirely new ski area that has come out of the ground in the last 2 years. There's one major hotel there, and there's another 8 to 10 more major hotels coming out of the ground now. So there's a lot of investment still going into it. So I'm kind of looking at that and being fairly confident as we move forward.
Tom, Carlton Gephardt writes, do you feel that the future is for skiers to specialize more in specific disciplines, or will they continue to ski in multiple disciplines?
That is a really interesting question. And I think if you'd have asked me this a couple of years ago, I would have said it's going more towards specialization. But more and more, I'm seeing skiers that are crossing the boundaries still and crossing from tech into speed. So at least on the alpine front. And then you can look at cross country. Just look at what Jessie Diggins has done this year. She's won in classic, she's won in skate, she's won in sprint, she's won in distance. And so I really would have said 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said we're heading towards specialization, but I don't see that anymore. I think that right now we're seeing more people crossing over to different disciplines than we have before.
Yeah, okay. And Poppy Gall writes, thank you, Peter and Tom. Thank you. Take a bow, Tom, for bringing back all those great memories and for the backstories. Lillehammer was my favorite Olympics as well. Tom, when we look back maybe the last 50 years, Bob Beatty, a New Hampshire native, was the first real champion of U.S. skiing. The sport was getting organized. They were starting to get offices and that kind of thing. And Bob, along with Patrick Lang's dad,
Sure.
yeah, started the World Cup. Tell me your thoughts on Beatty.
So I want to, in talking about Beatty, I want to name three names here, and we've talked about them earlier in the podcast. But to me, when I look at where skiing and snowboarding are today, I look to three people who have been, in my mind, the biggest difference makers, and it's Bob Beatty, Howard Peterson, and Bill Marolt. Those three people have had the vision and the persistence to execute to really get things done. And it all started with Beatty. And I remember when I'd been working for US Ski Association for 2 years on the Nordic side, and I wanted to do the PR job for the US ski team. And Howard Peterson called me up and he said, before you get this new job, you've got to call Bob Beatty and convince him that you're the right guy for the job. And it wasn't like a job interview. I just had to call Bob. And I had met Bob. I think you and I met Bob when he did the Lumberjack World Championships in
Yes.
Hayward, Wisconsin. So I had to call Bob. And I remember to this day sitting down in the lobby of the Antlers Hotel in Colorado Springs, using a telephone. There's no mobile phones at that point, but using a telephone in the lobby to call Bob Beatty. And I am scared to death. I'm calling Bob Beatty, this legend.
Mhm.
All he wanted to hear was that I was excited about ski racing. He was just a happy guy, but he became a real mentor for me, and he taught me a lot of things. Number one, he taught me don't forget Buddy Warner. And nobody that knew Buddy and worked with him wanted his legacy to die. They wanted to always remember Buddy. So that was the first thing I learned from Bob. But he really taught me kind of the ways of PR and how you tell stories. And that was what he did. That was how he brought fame to the US ski team. It was, I remember that scene from photos of Billy Kidd, silver medal, Jimmy Huga, bronze medal in the slalom on the very last day, the last weekend of the Olympics in '64 in Innsbruck. Bob had gone out and told the world, we're going to win medals. We're going to win a men's medal. And men's alpine for the US had never won an Olympic medal until 1964. And Bob knew how to make a story. And that's really what I learned from him. And I really miss him. And I just wish so often that I could call him up and talk stories or talk about those days of Buddy Werner and all the things that Bob brought to the sport.
Tom, Jim Sint writes, what is next for Olympic skiing sports? Predictions for new sports perhaps to be added?
That's a really good question, too. One of the things that we're seeing from the IOC a lot, and this is not just in skiing, but is the addition of team sports, particularly mixed teams. The beauty of it for the IOC is that you can add these events. You don't need to add athletes. You don't need to add venues. You've got everybody there already. So I'll make an example in aerials. Team aerials was added for Beijing in 22. We won the gold medal, and it was a team of men and women together, mixed team. And we're going to see that in the next game is Milan Cortina. I think we have mixed team jumping there, and there's a whole variety of these mixed team events. So that's and I know that's not new events, but what are we going to see for new events? I would really watch where free ride is going. I just have a sense that free ride is going to come onto the scene before long. The International Ski Federation about a year or two ago acquired the Free Ride World Tour. So I think that FIS is kind of gearing up to get free ride into the games a little bit further out. I'm also having now seen the team alpine event, the new team alpine event, where there's one slalom skier and one downhill skier. We saw that at Saalbach at World Championships last week. Breezy Johnson and Michaela Schifrin took the gold medal. I liked that. I thought that was a fun event to watch. It was simple and understandable, and it allowed us to see multiple stars together on a team. So I that's kind of a long-winded answer to not a lot of whole new events, but a lot of ways to approach events.
Our friend Lindahl writes, don't forget our own Ryan Cochran Siegel in the last Olympics.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And Lino, it's good to see you on the call here today. Yeah, Ryan's medal in Beijing, man, that was really, really something. I mean that whole games was so difficult. I did not go to that games, but I know those who were there. It was so difficult, and his accomplishment there was stunning. And I hope he can come back and have success at Bormio next year for the Olympics. That course in Bormio is a big course, much like the course in Beijing. So yeah, that was a great performance. Thanks for bringing that up, Lyndall.
Our friend Janice Lang writes, Tom, what is free ride?
Um, I'm probably not the best one to ask for that description, but free ride is just kind of what you do going out and skiing on a big mountain. It's using the mountain, uh, using the different elements on the mountain. It has less structure than other events. So, for example, if you take slope style, you go down a ramp, you hit a manicured jump, and you take off. In free ride, you're out using the mountain. You're using Mother Nature and the elements that are out there. Go and take a look at the Free Ride World Tour. They do a really good job at putting out video and information on the sport. But I do see that as one that I see coming on. That's the only kind of new sport that I see coming or new discipline. But that is one that I think we may see. I don't know if we'll see it in 2030 or if we'll see it in 34, but I do see it coming on pretty strong.
We're still taking your questions. We have a couple more minutes left of the program. John Kelly writes, how has the importance of weather forecasts for Olympic organizers, venue operators, coaches, and competitors grown over the years at the Winter Olympics?
Well, the thing about it is we can just take our phones right now, and there's so much we can do with our own phones. There's so
Sure.
much data that's available. But I tell you, it's absolutely critical. And I'm going to make a non-Olympic example, but I watched the Daytona 500 this past weekend. And if any of you are motorsports fans, you know that they had a lot of weather problems. But the ability of them to now forecast, so take Daytona, it is a big track, but they can forecast when the rain is going to hit which portion of the track. So it might be raining in turn one and not raining in turn three. So that kind of micro forecasting now has become really commonplace. So if you're an event organizer, like if you're organizing an Olympics, the data that you have available to you now to conduct events fairly and safely is absolutely astounding. So it's a really huge, huge element. And gone are the days of holding your finger up and trying to figure out what the winds are going to do. It's very sophisticated now, and it's readily accessible to anyone.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Still time to take another question or two if you'd like. Um, Tom, while we do that and await other questions, how about some time for a little closing remarks from you?
Well, I want to go back to what I started out with, that when I was 7 years old, the Olympics caught my attention. And I was fortunate to be able to make my way up the stairs to spend my career working in it. But when I think back to what is it that makes the Olympics so interesting to me, I think it's the kid next door. It's You think about Olympians that we know, and I've worked with a lot of them, even the biggest stars, they're just the kid next door. And you want to help them. People want to help them. People want to help them achieve goals in their lives. And, I've been in the finish area for 75 or more Olympic medals, and that is just awesome. But what gives me the most satisfaction is just to see the life skills that kids get out of sports. So the agenda that I push within our 2034 management team is how do we use the Olympics to catalyze every community in the state of Utah and give kids the opportunity. Last week, I was at an event to honor Bob Marsh, who's a longtime coach here in Park City, and they named the timing building after him. And he was there for it. He's suffering from cancer right now, but he was there for it. And it was just fun to see him. But what gives him the most pride and things that he's done in his career are the lessons that he gave kids. And
Hmm.
some of you may remember Tori Pillinger, who was a great ski racer from Park City, who was severely injured in a crash in Likerbod many years ago. Her two daughters were there, and Tori passed from cancer a few years ago, but her daughters never ski raced. They were never in his program, but they were telling me about all the lessons they learned from mom that she'd learned from Bob Marsh in ski racing. That's what's most important. So for all of you on the call, I know you're here because you're somehow involved in sport. Remember, at the end of the day, it's not that your kids are winning an Olympic medal, it's the lessons they learn along the way.
Well said, Tom. We have one more question, perhaps the final one. Do you know if there'll be any changes to the Alpine race venues in Salt Lake 2034?
That's a good question. The Alpine, and I should have probably gone through the venues. The venues will, for the most part, be the same, but one change that is being made, all of the Alpine events are going to Snow Basin. It's just more efficient to run them there. So the slalom was at Deer Valley in '02. That will move to Snow Basin. The giant slalom was at Park City Mountain. That will move to Snow Basin. So that's the plan.
Okay, so there is likely to be a lot more development and work on that venue.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, for those that follow this really closely, Snow Basin has not been engaged in alpine ski racing since the games. That has really changed now in the last few years. There's a super active club there now. The Holding family still owns Snow Basin, but the current leadership there has made really, really positive changes. I'm actually going up there to do a podcast next Monday to talk to the marketing director. In the Ski Magazine reader poll this year, Snow Basin actually is ranked number one. And this was a really strategic direction for Snow Basin to kind of get back into the game and really up its customer service. It already has great skiing up there, but they've done some amazing things up there, and they are so fired up about the Olympics. Davey Ratchford is the mountain manager there now, and he is really motivated for the Olympics in 2034.
Getting a comment here, and this may be our final one. No, we've got two more. Tom, you're amazing. I didn't really know him. What a great session. So thank you for that. Um,
Thank you.
hey, Peter and Tom from Nick. TK, I know you love stats. Do you find the ski and snowboard and Winter Olympic sports generally somewhat like baseball generate novel stats? Could you share any examples of a very novel first ever, or this has not been done since 19 so and so, stats for ski or snowboard? To me, Michaela's 99 current world championship wins is somewhat of an obvious example. Thanks, TK. Why don't you take that and run with it, Tom?
So I'm going to slightly disagree with you on one point because I think that skiing could do a better job with novel stats. And I will also say I am a little bit annoyed at how deep stats are going on some televised sports. Like, I don't need to know that this was the first time that someone threw a touchdown to a friend of their second cousin who lived next door to the guy down the street. I don't need to know that kind of detail. But what I would like to see in skiing is for skiing to loosen up a little bit and I'll take an example, Peter, that you can probably relate to is like distance records in ski jumping. Like FIS was never so keen on really doing distance records. Or when we had speed skiing, they wanted to change it from speed records to timed records. And that stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So if you want some little tidbits that I think is interesting, here's one. And I saw this stat come through 2 weeks ago when Breezy Johnson won the downhill, that her speed was the fastest ever recorded by a woman in a downhill. And I took exception to that because I just said, I don't know about this. So I went and researched it. She wasn't the fastest in the race. She was second fastest. But my memory is that the speed in kilometers per hour translated out to about 87 and change in miles per hour. So I did some checking and I went back in history and I looked at women's analyses at the major downhills going back some years. And it was indeed the fastest speed that I could find. So I think it's little stats like that that I wish FIS had a little bit better process on than they do now.
Yeah. Mary Rohr, thanks for your comment. Carlton Gebhardt, love your Ski Utah podcast, Tom. That
Thank
looks like that's the final question. I really want to thank you, Tom, for being with us. You're a walking lexicon, indeed, and a good friend over the years. And we touched on a lot of things. There's so very much more we could talk about if we had a couple of hours and more names to talk about. But I hope we did a satisfactory job pointing out some of those things. So thank you. Tom, thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, just a few other thoughts. Hopefully, Peggy Shin, I've given you some ideas so you can write a bunch of stories. And I want to just do a shout out to Kathy Robbins, my dear friend Paul. We think of him a lot. Lee and Diana, miss you guys. And Trina, good to see you on here. So many others, Nick and others. So thank you all for coming on tonight and letting Pete and I talk a little bit.
All right. That is Tom Kelly. And what an evening we have had. The time flies with such an interesting guest. And back at our Vermont Ski and Snowboard Museum is the executive director, Abby Blackburn. Abby, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and a huge thank you to Tom and Peter for sharing their incredible insights and stories. I again would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our sponsors and supporters. And as a reminder, your donation in increments of $10 earns you a raffle entry for a pair of Darn Tough socks. So don't forget to get those donations in. And please come visit us at the museum and check out our newest exhibit, Searching for Vermont's Lost Ski Areas. We are open Thursday through Sunday, noon to 5. I'm just grateful that you all decided to spend your evenings with us, and I hope to see you at future events, and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.